Welcome back. In this video, we'll be covering the second half of Chapter 4, School and Educational Psychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. So what kind of coursework is recommended for your bachelor's degree program that will connect to your interests in school or educational psychology? The kinds of coursework that we typically see, and I will pause here and say, our program has three majors. We have a psychology major, a neuroscience major, and a human development and family science major. People who are interested in school and educational psychology, I've noticed, tend to gravitate toward that human development and family sciences side or the psychology side. Just because of the nature of their interests. So the kinds of courses that you're going to need, you're still going to need research methods and stats because it's an evidence-based science. But other courses that you might guess would be involved: abnormal psychology, child psychopathology, developmental psychology, and that can include child psychology, adolescent psychology, adulthood and aging. It can include lifespan development. It can even include highly specialized things like socio-emotional development, cognitive development. Courses in family systems, ethics, cognitive psychology, all of those can be really useful. Some of the elective areas that people may be interested in picking up, because it can be an asset for them, is studying diversity and inclusion, communication, foundations in education, instructional strategies, public speaking, and so on. Applied experiences that can be really helpful. So here we're talking volunteering, internships, part-time jobs. If you're interested in this area and you want to get a feel for what it's like, participating in after-school programs, working as an intern or a volunteer in child and adolescent mental health care settings, big brothers, big sisters, daycares, preschools, Head Start programs, nonprofits. There are lots of possibilities for shadowing, for interning, and for volunteering that can be a real asset as you're going forward with your education. Research experiences that can be valuable for you is, working with a developmental psychologist, working with a school psychologist, working with an educational psychologist at your university on their research projects. The topics tend to be in the psychopathology area, in cognitive and social development, in early interventions, in program assessment, looking at specific disorders like attention and learning disorders or autism spectrum disorders, investigating technology and the way it impacts learning, doing general educational assessments, and then, interventions for very specific things like bullying prevention, violence prevention, resiliency training. Now, graduate degree opportunities, and we're going to start with doctoral and then we'll shift to other kinds of degrees. But if you want to call yourself a school psychologist, remember that word psychologist is a protected label. It requires a doctoral level education, and to be a service provider, it requires a license. So school psychologists, because it's a clinical specialty, they're going to work with school kids to improve their educational experience. They engage in a lot of different activities, but a lot of their work is assessment related. So they're going to do tests and assessments, but they'll also be involved in consulting activities like parent education and training, intervention programs, prevention programs, doing some counseling. The career path is sort of shifting away from one-on-one counseling, though, to more that testing and assessment side of things. So if you're thinking about this as a career path, do some investigating, talk to school psychologists about their work. Remember that a school psychologist is not the same thing as a school counselor. Different jobs, completely different jobs. They may have some overlapping areas, like they work in the same building, but they're doing very different things. So keep that in mind. Much of their time in a school setting is assessment work. So they're going to be giving tests, doing assessments, sometimes doing actual diagnostic work, like diagnosing ADHD, for example. They would provide other kinds of educational services to teachers as well as administrators. They may be involved in skill development with parents and teachers, particularly if they're working with kids who have very specific kinds of behavioral needs. They also may be involved in the creation of district-wide or building-wide initiatives, so that they are appropriately built and have assessment methods built in so that you can determine whether or not they're effective. They may be engaged, and this is more likely if you're talking about a school psychologist in private practice, in providing direct supports to kids and families. When they're in private practice, and school psychologists, more and more these days, school systems, given that they have budgetary constraints, they're becoming less able to provide their own in-house school psychologist who's available to students in their building. Sometimes they have to have one school psychologist for the whole district, and obviously that's just not feasible. So you have to have access to school psychologists from some other source. And where's that source? School psychologists in private practice. So they're going to provide consultation, assessment, prevention, intervention services. And they'll contract with a district in order to provide those specific services. Now, typically, they're going to provide those services from their own space, not in the school building. So they're not going to have an office down the hall from your school counselor. They're going to be in their own space. Some of them, as I just said, they're going to have a private office where they do their work. There will be, in some cases, school psychologists in private practice who travel, who do work with several school districts, or more than one school district, or more than one building within a school district, to do the work that they do. They may or may not have office space that's dedicated to them. It just depends on how much they're doing work on site. One of the advantages of private practice is you get to set your own boundaries. You have control over your own hours. You choose your clients. You choose your projects. Disadvantage, you may have limited access to the actual school environment. So you really need to think, if this is something you want to do, be a professional school psychologist, think about the environment you want to work in. And it's not like it's a one decision thing. You may start out working for a school system. You may then decide, it's a little too restrictive. I want to go into private practice so I can do some other things too. Now, also typically at the doctoral level, you have policy analysts and consultants. These are individuals, like I have a friend that I went to graduate school with who her PhD is in developmental psychology. She's often said if she had it to do over again, she'd get a school psychology PhD. But her work now is very much in the same domain. And she works as a policy analyst as well as a bullying prevention consultant, because that was her major research area during her graduate years. So what do policy analysts do? They use data to help governments decide what kind of policies to implement. They can also work as policy analysts for schools and school systems, or for nonprofit organizations. It's typically educational psychologists who do this work, although some individuals are school psychologists on the clinical side. But you have a lot of educational psychologists at the doctoral level who do policy analysis of educational policies, assessing effectiveness, making recommendations to policy makers about what needs to happen. Policy analysts are going to do reviews. It's a lot of documenting, a lot of analyzing what the policies are, and then working with educators and other researchers to collect data to make good decisions. These are consulting roles, so they're using their expertise, they're offering their expertise to organizations in order to give them guidance based on data for what kind of policies to have. We see policy analysts who are educational psychologists or school psychologists in a bunch of different contexts until recently. That the Department of Education at the federal level is under a high degree of stress right now. It's 2025, and there's an active movement to basically get rid of the Department of Education at the federal level. We'll all have to see whether or not that plays out. But many of these educational consultants are working in government agencies. You'll have to keep your eye on that. If this is something you see yourself really being interested in, the next few years are going to be a time period of transition where we see where these consulting jobs are going. They may shift more into the private sector, into think tanks and nonprofits, instead of being federal or state level jobs. So these nonprofit type organizations or education advocacy organizations, research think tanks may be another space where independent consultants can work. Another possibility, again, usually at the doctoral level, is administration. Sometimes at the master's level, but a lot of individuals in this space are going to be doctoral level. I have noticed a trend for more school administrative jobs, such as, a lot of the not superintendent type positions, but other kinds of levels. That degree requirement is more often a master's degree than a doctoral degree. But the the higher the level, the greater the educational expectations. So school administrators may be principals, they may be superintendents. Their jobs are variously described, but they're managing the operations of the school and the school district. They have responsibilities for the academic spheres, the personnel spheres, the facility spheres, and there may be different administrators performing jobs in these various roles, depending on their areas of specialization. A district superintendent, that's someone who is more likely to have a doctoral level degree, but it depends on the nature of the school district itself. So, do some investigating the schools in your area, kind of do some thinking about what are the educational backgrounds of these individuals. These are, high level jobs, and they pay reasonably well. At the same time, though, you're dealing with a volatile environment, an environment that's highly changeable. Just the political climate today should inform you what some of the sociocultural stressors are for district administrators. So what are some of the graduate education and training considerations that you need to be thinking about if you're interested in school and educational psychology? For school psychology, there are specialist level degrees that are popping up over the last several years. More traditionally, it's a doctoral degree that is preferred. As I've mentioned several times, school psychology is a clinical specialty. So some of the same things that you need to become a clinical psychologist, you also need to be a school psychologist. The specialist level degree is a shorter program. It's roughly 3 years, usually includes 60 credit hours. So to me, it's more on par with a big master's program. So it's a bit heavier than your traditional master's program, but not as heavy as a doctoral program in terms of years of study. Doctoral degrees typically require about 110 credit hours. It's a research practitioner model, requires a dissertation. Generally speaking, you're talking about 5 or more years, plus an internship under supervision. Usually, both the specialist programs and the doctoral programs, you need to do a 1-year internship, 1,200 hours of supervised training. And then school psychologists, if they're going to be working in the school environment, they need to have licensure and take an exam. For educational psychology, there are a couple of different pathways here. The PhD, or what's called an EDD, or doctoral in education. And this shows, kind of the two educational environments in which people with these interests tend to find themselves. Some people who become educational psychologists are purely trained in education programs. Some people, though, are purely trained in a psychology context. So you can come at this career path from either direction. There will be some overlapping philosophies, overlapping educational experiences. There will often be, though, cultural differences in terms of the way these programs are structured. PhDs tend to be offered in psychology departments overwhelmingly. So you would get a doctor of philosophy in psychology, and your area of specialization would be educational psychology. ED degrees are almost exclusively in education departments. The EDD emphasizes practical applications and also providing professional development experiences for educators who are in leadership positions. So like creating principal licensure training programs, for example. So you're talking about creating educational programs, instructional programs that have real world applications, training those people who want to be principals, who want to be superintendents, who want to be in those management positions, getting them the skills that they need to be able to deliver instruction and improve their educational systems. PhD programs in educational psychology tend to emphasize the theoretical backdrop. So a lot of applications in cognitive psychology and learning theory and applying it to an educational context. The curriculum in these programs tends to be more scientific, more research-based, and less pragmatic in terms of being specifically directed at training educational leaders. Now, there are master's level careers, and this is becoming more and more common in school counseling, that you'll have specific master's degree programs for school counseling. Now, I said earlier in this presentation, being a school psychologist is not the same thing as being a school counselor. And I often have students who sit in my office and they go, huh? What do you mean? Because their experience is in high school. So think back for a minute to your high school experience. Who were the people who sat down and helped you with your schedule? So those have variously been called guidance counselors, who give you guidance for how to get through your educational experience. That also is not a school counselor, although some school counselors will also have that job responsibility of helping with scheduling. But school counselors it's a specialization of a counseling degree. So a lot of school counselors now, they'll have an LPC, they'll be a licensed counselor. The master's degree it could be in educational psychology, it could be in general psychology or experimental psychology. But if you're talking about wanting to work in a school where you help kids deal with their social, emotional, behavioral issues, concerns, that are relevant to school, that's the school counselor. So there are master's degree opportunities that are more research based. So let's say that, you're really interested in the research side. You can get a master's degree in educational psychology and become the person who works with the PhD level educational psychologist to do research. So that's one option to work in consulting. Students who are interested in the practice side, though, they may want to become a school counselor. Now, some schools are going to call these individuals guidance counselors, but more and more often now, I'm seeing a separation in terms of the professional responsibilities between the school counselor and someone who may simply provide scheduling and advising. So I'm seeing a trend to separating the two. Some school systems, though, they have both. What has become clear, though, is to deliver counseling services as a school counselor. More and more states demand that person's fitting that position be a licensed clinical counselor. That requires a master's degree. So school counselors, what do? They help students to have a better understanding of social, behavioral, and interpersonal issues that they may be having in school. For instance, one of my kids was having trouble in middle school making friends, and the school counselor worked with them to improve their communication skills, work with them on just role playing, introducing themselves to other people, help them to navigate, because my kid is on the autism spectrum, helping them to navigate understanding what other students are trying to convey in terms of emotional expression. School counselors are trained in counseling, so they are capable of identifying problems, helping to strategize and intervene, and help students learn skills that can make them more successful, both, personally, but also in terms of their social relationships and their academic growth. Becoming a school counselor does require the same master's degree requirements at an APA accredited program, supervised experience, and obtaining a school counseling certification. In some states, it's called a licensure, but a lot of school counselors these days, regardless of where they are, they get the same credentialing, that LPC or LPCC licensure through the state. Each state is going to have slightly different requirements, so keep an eye on that ball. Public school counselors in some states, so if you're working in a public school district, some school systems in some states require that you also have a teaching certificate. Many school states are moving away from that. It used to be, and this is where some of the legacy of the guidance counselor comes into play. I know when I was in high school, our guidance counselor was also the history teacher and the basketball coach. It was sort of a multi-purpose job. You were the person students met with to set their schedule for the next semester or the next unit. School counseling has become more and more and more professionalized. So there used to be this requirement that if you're going to be a guidance counselor, you also had to be a teacher at the school. Now it's being separated out. So we're seeing fewer and fewer states as the years roll by actually requiring that their school counselors who are, credentialed master's degree holding counselors, that they also have a teaching degree. Because it's a barrier to providing psychological services to students that they need. So more states are moving away from that. And that concludes the second part of Chapter 4.